Welcome back, and I'm going to continue with the exploration of deep order mathematics, and today look at some basic system equations. And the spirit in which we're taking this is just that of experimentation and approximation. Whatever I say may change over time, but here's where the thinking is today. So we started the entire exploration of deep order by looking at a universal pattern of sustainable progress that occurs regardless of area, region, time, space. And this was very simply depicted as a shift that occurs across time, and this shift is the same, so it goes through, there's a implicit order in time that any organization will go through, and it will traverse three phases which we call the physical, vital, and mental. And when we step back and ask, why is it that this is occurring regardless of area, regardless of industry, regardless of region of the world, regardless of type of organization, regardless of complexity of organization, why is it that we see the same pattern occurring? Then that leads us to perhaps a deeper understanding of the system in which we exist in. And I had spoken earlier about 4 characteristics that emerge, but today what I want to do is look at those characteristics from a more quote-unquote mathematical perspective, so try and put equations around those. So the very first thing that I'll say is that we know as a reality that any kind of shift, any kind of organizational shift is non-trivial. There's a resistance that occurs, and it requires a lot of power to overcome the resistances that occur in a single journey. And we can represent these resistances as, say, the resistance on the physical side, resistance that occurs as one's passing through a vital phase or beginning to approach the mental phase, and resistances that are ongoing in one's mental orientation or journey, whether it's at the self or any kind of complex organization. Now the reality is that these resistances, just in terms of approximating and trying to arrive at a single equation that tells us something about the system, I'll say that these resistances may feed on each other, and so we have a kind of a multiplicative function. But the point is that, as we see, there is this progress regardless of the resistance. So there is something about the system that we live in whereby its power is greater than any resistance that may arise within a single journey. But now if we look at, and earlier we had looked at something that we call the causal wedge, which was bounded by time on one axis and space on one axis, and we considered a time-space boundary n, and the causal wedge was defined as the area underneath that time-space boundary n. And basically, any kind of organization that we consider, or system or market, is going to exist within some time-space boundary n. So to generalize this equation, what we could say is that this power, if we think about the fact that this journey is happening simultaneously for a lot of different organizations, regardless of where they are, therefore this power is such that it is greater than the cumulative resistances. So considering all the resistances that occur in any single journey and then accumulating them under some time-space boundary n, we can say that from time-space 0 to time-space boundary n, if we accumulate or take a cumulative aggregate of all these different resistances, this power that exists in the system is yet greater than anything, because always there's this forward progress regardless of the complexity or the area in which it's occurring. So there is something about the system whereby its power can be approximated by this equation, and we can call this further the characteristics. We can refer to this as omnipower. So that's one equation or one characteristic that we had talked about earlier that we're now giving an equation to. Now similarly, we can also hypothesize, or we have hypothesized, and here I'm just converting it into an equation, that there is, regardless of the area within, under any time-space boundary n, there is always this possibility of this movement occurring. So there's a presence, the system has a presence, and this presence somehow knows when there's the possibility of something moving from one stage to the other. So if we represent this any kind of time-space area, and here I'll just generalize it to say from 0 to n, so regardless of the time-space area that we're considering, there is a presence, and this presence is such that it recognizes always the opportunity to move any system or any organization from a physical to a vital orientation, and similarly to move it from a vital to a mental orientation, and to be more precise, leading here. So we have something here that I call omnipresence, that is defined by an equation of this nature. Now, we'd also say that there's a lot of knowledge that's required. So the system has a lot of implicit knowledge because it knows what kind of instrument or what kind of circumstance to use to effect the transition or the forward movement from the physical to the vital to the mental. So there's something that perhaps we can call omniscience, represented by omni to the base s. And here, this also is true for any time-space area. So I'll represent that as from 0 to n. And there's a knowledge that basically leverages instrumentation and circumstance of either a physical, vital, or mental nature. So I'll represent that as the physical instrumentation and circumstance, vital instrumentation and circumstance, mental instrumentation and circumstance. So there's a knowledge that leverages instrumentation and circumstance of any kind to basically bring about that movement from the physical leading to the vital leading, or the vital leading to the mental leading. So this equation, I would say, is an approximation for omniscience. And then the fourth characteristic, which I call omni-loving, and represented by omni and the base L, that too, now this is a philosophical point, but the philosophical point is that the system could have left us at a certain operational reality, say the physical negative orientation leading, and we could have been there forever. But the reality is that we're not, and the reality is that there is always a breaking through to higher and higher possibility, whereby the circumstances and the fullness of our life increases. And so we can say that across the time-space field or area, again represented from 0 to n, there is something remarkable that continues to happen, and that is that there's a shift from the physical negative orientation leading to the vital negative orientation leading to the mental negative orientation leading. And this continues into the physical positive orientation leading, the vital positive orientation leading, the mental positive orientation leading, and beyond, whatever lies beyond that. But the fact is that this happening in more and more areas, regardless of the complexity of the organization and regardless of where the organization exists, points to this reality of love, whereby the system wants us to experience a greater and greater possibility at any point in time and space. So that I would represent by this. And so here are four approximate representations by equation of characteristics, four deep characteristics that are present in any point in space in this entire time-space area that we might be considering.